Now, no one wants to be a bad PhD student. Now, I've had my fair share of bad attributes during my PhD, just as my supervisor. But the problem is that sometimes we can't see those damaging aspects of ourselves. And so in this video, I'm going to share with you the kind of common traits of bad PhD students. But the good thing is you can learn your way out of them. You can change. I am an example of that, no doubt. I'll share those stories along the way. But one of the biggest things is apathy. That is kind of the defining characteristic of a range of different PhD problems. And it's because the system has generated over the many years that it's been sort of like absorbing PhD students from masters, from undergraduate, and it's this lack of direction, this kind of just idea that, well, I got to the end of my undergraduate, I don't want to do a job, so I'll just do a PhD because that just seems like the next logical step. This kind of path of least resistance I've talked about in the past. And I did see, even from when I graduated to the end of my last postdoc, which is about 10 years, I did really see a load of students that just became really just uninspired about being there. And so this apathy, it starts relatively early on, and they're like, oh, I'll do that tomorrow. Oh, I don't care. Whereas, you know, if you're an academic, you kind of want a little bit of hustle, not like hustle culture, not like you got to do it, stay in the lab forever, but just, you know, like, okay, let's show some initiative. Let's get this done. And everyone's like, well, that was a problem, so I didn't do that. And this is actually a big problem, I think, when your system doesn't inspire the next generation, and you get this whole cohort come through that are like, well, I'm here because I just don't, really know what else to do. And that is a big problem. Now, this is very different from burnout. I just want to point that out. Burnout and apathy kind of go hand in hand. The later stages of burnout, go check out my other video about that, is kind of apathy. But you do find yourself sliding into that, and that is overcomable. Is that a word? But yes, apathy from the early stages is a problem. But if you find yourself slipping into it, it could be early signs of burnout. So they are very separate, but kind of share some similar features. So yes, if you don't know why you're there, you're not really interested in being there, you waltz into the lab at like 11 a.m. and leave at 2, and you're like, something will happen, that's probably a bad sign. This video is brought to you by my newsletter. Go check it out at andrewstapleton.com.au/newsletter. And when you sign up, you'll get 5 exclusive emails, everything from the tools I use, the podcasts I've been on, my TEDx talk, and more. So that content is only available on that newsletter. It's completely free. Go sign up and you'll get that content into your inbox. This was one of my biggest issues early on in my PhD, is that I wanted quick results. And that made me an impatient and bad PhD student. And that's because I was going after the lowest effort stuff. And don't get me wrong, early on in your PhD, it kind of rewards you because you're like, I did this, I got results, makes my supervisor happy. I did this, got my results. But then as you kind of get rid of those low-hanging fruit experiments or ideas, you are left with what actually makes a PhD, which is the hard stuff, which is combining ideas, doing long-term experiments, following through a whole set of experimental results, doing the same thing over and over again for reproducibility, which arguably science has a huge problem with at the moment. And that is the long game. And I spent far too long early on doing the easy stuff because I didn't want to spend ages in the lab. Some of the experiments at the end of my PhD took me multiple months to collect the results. And even though I sort of, it was good, I started going there every single day, just little bit, and I built up the results to put in my thesis. That's not what I wanted early on. So you can learn patience during a PhD. In fact, I think it's inevitable. You will learn these things. The human brain is so fixated on the sort of now and the short-term future, and you forget that sometimes you just need to relax, do those things, trust the process, go through, collect those results, and then sort of like take stock at the end. So yes, a bad PhD student could be someone that is incredibly impatient. And you've got to have patience. Being coachable is such an important aspect of being a good PhD student, because sometimes you look at your research supervisors and you're like, you're an idiot. And they're not an idiot. They're looking at it through their lens, and it's up to you to distill that information. Like I said, early on, absorbing, it's much easier to be coachable because you're the newbie to this field. So you absorb all the information, you synthesize it, you're always checking back in. They can micromanage you a little bit more. And then as you progress, maybe towards the end of your second year and the early third year, like, that's not going to work. But you can say, I don't think that's going to work. But sometimes PhD supervisors are fixated on the one thing, and you just have to you sit there, listen. And sometimes I would say, yes, I'll try that experiment, and I would. And even though I was doing it the whole time, I was like, ugh. It's all about being coachable. It's all about working with your supervisor on that relationship. And, I have sat down with a couple of know-it-all, so PhD students that I was training up on a certain instrument, and they wouldn't listen. They were there, but they weren't there in their mind. They were physically in the same room, and they'd be like, yes, yep. And I'm like, you click. I don't think you understand. But they're like, oh yeah, no, I've done this before, whatever. And I'm like, I know you haven't. This is a new thing. Anyway, those issues can make you very hard to work with as a PhD student. So don't be a know-it-all. Be coachable and just accept information. It's up to you to distill it down to its important parts later on. But being completely sort of standoffish in a supervisor meeting or a know-it-all is, pretty destructive. Supervising a PhD student that has no initiative is very frustrating. There's a lot of moments in the PhD journey where you're kind of floundering, and it's up to you to take initiative. Go reach out to that person. Do that result collection that no one else has told you to do. Do that experiment that you think will work. And yes, it's going to cause a load of other side problems that you need to solve, but that is part of doing a PhD. And I've seen so many PhD students be like, well, this is a problem and this is a problem. And it's just excuses. And there are real excuses, I get it. But when someone just piles excuses on top of excuses and is not actively working to get around challenges and problems, that is when it can really sort of like eat into the PhD time. And it, just makes the whole PhD process much more painful than it should be. Having purpose, having passion, having drive, all go in with taking the initiative. And, I think I always went into supervisor meetings saying, like, this is the problem and this is what I wanted to do. Taking that initiative is so important. Go check out my other video about successful supervisor meetings, because there's a simple formula that I kind of created over my time as a PhD student and a postdoc that I think just really works. It shows you've taken the initiative, you can take on information, i.e. be coachable, and then you go away and do that experiment and report back in 2 weeks' time. And I think that is a really good way of showing that you can take initiative, that you're coachable, and just kind of keep that momentum up throughout your PhD. Now, this one may be a little bit controversial, but I think I have seen some other bad PhD students that are perfectionists. Like perfection to a fault. And that is a very fine balancing act, because you do want to produce good research that will stand up to peer review. Let the peer reviewers tell you what is wrong. The act of being too perfectionist is being your own peer reviewer, which to a point is good, but there's a moment where you just have to let go and send it off. You have to write that thing that isn't perfect. You have to set yourself a task and finish it knowing that it is not perfect. Send it off to your supervisor, to the peer review board, whatever it is. Get that non-perfect thing out in the world. A lot of the time with academic grant success, it's a numbers game. Apply for 10 grants, you'll get 1. It doesn't necessarily matter the exact wording of a sentence. Sure, it needs to make sense, but I've seen so many people be perfectionists to a fault, and strive for perfection when it doesn't really exist. Getting 80%, 85% of the way to your goal is good enough. And I would say that, keeping up momentum is really hard when you're a perfectionist, because a task will completely take up the time you give it. So if you want to sit down and write a paper and you give it a day, maybe not a day, it's a bit much. Let's say you want to write an introduction. You give it a whole day. You will finish in that day. If you give it 2 weeks, you'll end up filling that whole 2 weeks just changing little things that don't matter. So perfectionism can get in the way. It's a really hard fine balancing act. You want to do your best, but to a point, you have to just say, you know what, this is 80% done. I got to move on. I got to do more work. I've got to move on to that next challenge, because you can get stuck in this weird circle of just nothingness, but you feel so productive. And sometimes it's the easy option as well. So anyway, perfectionism is a thing I think can actually cause a PhD student to struggle far more than they need to. So there we have it. There are the attributes that I would say would make up a bad PhD student. Now, that's not to say that this bad PhD student will stay like this forever. Remember, you can learn your way out of problems. You can change the way you approach your PhD, and that is so very important. A PhD is a time to grow as a professional and as a person, and I certainly feel like I was a different person at the end of my PhD. All right, so let me know in the comments what you would add to that, and also go check out academiainsider.com. That's my new project I launched this year. There, I've got my ebook, The Ultimate Academic Writing Toolkit, as well as my insider forum for helping people become better academics and PhD students. All right, I shall see you in the next video.